Hey guys, welcome back to Sam's Project Bench. Today we're taking a break from working on the cars and going outside and doing some furniture upholstery. Before we get to work today, I just want to say thank you to all the people that have recently subscribed to the channel. It's blown up quite a bit in the last few weeks, and we've just hit our first 1,000 subscribers, so thank you so much to everyone who has taken the time to subscribe and have chosen to watch these videos. I certainly appreciate it, can't thank you enough. Alright, let's get back to work. So these are the seats I'm going to be recovering. So I'm going to be recovered in a gold vinyl. Now this is a Roebuck Gold. Now I sourced this from Novatex International. I think it's meant to be like a remanufactured gold vinyl for some of our old Holdens here in Australia, but being Novatex, this might be available internationally, and not 100% certain on that. But this is what we plan to redo these salon chairs in. So both these chairs are identical, so we should get away with making one pattern. So when I look at these seats to choose which one I want to use for a pattern, I always try to get the better one of the two to actually get our pattern from. So I'm thinking is this one. Whereas you look over here, this has a few more cracks and don't know what's happened in the center, something's hit it at some point. But I will be choosing this one to get my pattern from. Now some of these you've got to be a little bit careful of when you're pulling apart. Because as you just undo the zip here, two zips for some reason, sometimes they're glued in behind the back, and as you try to separate it from the foam, sometimes it can actually tear away from the foam. So to help prevent that, you can heat up the face. Looks like this one's not stuck too bad. I'm going to heat it up anyway and detach that vinyl from the foam, and that would just help separate the bond of the glue and the vinyl. Base is disconnected. Now this here, I should be able to slip off without dismantling any further. Alright, a little bit of foam damage. I was hoping to avoid that. I suppose if I used two hands I might have been able to prevent that. That's alright, I'll glue that foam back together. So I have the seat turned inside out, and with my marker, this time I'm using a Sharpie, I'll be putting a few marks on it. So these are what I call creep marks. So this will be our center. In theory, should be our center. And these marks will tell us if the panels are lining up as they should, as we're sewing the pieces back together. So a crucial part of this kind of work is a very important step to remember. Now this is where the two pieces join, so the two border panels join. It has a seam in the middle. So when I identify that mark as different from other ones, and I'll do that by just putting an extra couple marks, and that identifies as there's a join in the border that meets that location. And a couple more along, and down the bottom we have another center mark. flip over, and repeat the process. So the top doesn't have an existing center mark, but we should be able to just continue that mark down. Now, being this is symmetrical, we only need to mark up 1/2 of the seat cover, and then all we need to do is flip it over to get both sides. Now, when marking these, I'll try not get them exactly the same, although this side I've done the marks almost identical to the opposing side. So to make sure I don't get confused when I'm putting back together, I'm going to put an extra couple additional marks on this side. So it's not entirely necessary to do so many. In fact, so many can get confusing, but that identifies one side versus the other. It'll help prevent confusion later. So now I have this marked up. I'm going to unpick it and separate the individual panels. Now I'm just going to use the camera trick here. You don't need to see all the boring unpicking, so we'll snap to. So I have a strip now. I've also added a back and an F, just so I don't get confused which one's for the back of the seat and what's the face of the seat. So there's 2 slides in this, because 2 opposing slides. That allows the zips to be done up from either end and meet in the center, so that the slides are not visible to the outside of the seats. That way they can be hidden underneath here. And if you really wanted to, you could actually cut that tab off so that that wasn't as easily visible. So I don't have any more black zip, so I'm just going to replace it with white. And instead of having an exposed tooth in the style that we have here, I'm going to try hide as much of the zip as I can, because white will contrast pretty bright on that gold roebuck there. Alright, so I'm going to lay the vinyl up and set our pattern in place, and I'll show you what I do there. So I have these panels now laid out on the vinyl. I'm going to start by cutting these skinnier sections first. Now, you've got to remember now that we have 2 cushions to make of the same pattern, so everything we draw here we then have to duplicate. So what I like to do is draw one from the initial pattern, then after I cut it out I will trace around the piece that we have already marked. That way everything seems to be more likely to be the same. So I'm going to trace out this. I'm going to first weight it down so it doesn't want to move, and push out these seams and trace along the edges. Now I haven't marked out 1/2, that's alright. So I'm going to put a couple marks along the way just to make sure that when we fold it in half it all lays as it should, because sometimes if the center is just a little bit out, a few millimeters out of center, it can twist the way the pattern sits. So you want to give a couple guide points along the way just to make sure center folds as it should. And then once I flip it over, then I can transfer the marks across to the other side. Typically, I wouldn't recommend using a Sharpie to mark out your pattern, as the marker can actually bleed through the vinyl and show on the other side. but for the purpose on filming it with the camera, you'll be able to see the line much more clearly by me using the Sharpie there. So I've got the base outline marked up on this first one here, so just about ready to cut her out and then fold her up in half. So I just got to put a couple guide lines on the other half just to check that everything's working as it should. Now, I get asked fairly often why I don't just cut the seams, rather why do I unpick the seams rather than just cut them? Because cutting them obviously would be quicker 9 times out of 10. The reason I choose not to is I often get a better pattern and a better ability to mark it up more accurately by maintaining the seam. So some cases where it is too painful and too difficult to actually unpick the seam, it's probably worth just to cut it. But if it's a fairly simple job like this one, it's not too hard to actually just unpick the seam, then it's probably something I recommend, especially if you're starting out, because a lot of the time the base vinyl is stretched from years of use, and having that seam there allows for a less of a tainted pattern to actually map up from. So just a little piece of advice for you. So that's how we duplicate our pattern. So put you on a time lapse and I'll get the other ones marked out, because even the bigger ones, it's the same principle as these smaller ones. So I'll quickly run those through and we get to the next stage. Now I forgot to mention a little earlier in the video, but when I mark out these panels here, I allow a 10mm seam, or 1 centimeter. So if you do cut out on the actual stitch line itself, I'll allow 1 centimeter for stitching. So that's how far out I mark from the stitch line out for the allowance. So you can keep that in mind when you're working on these. So about 1 centimeter. I know other people allow half an inch, or what's that, 12.5 millimeters, but for me 1 centimeter is enough. Alright, got me panels now cut out. I'm about to start the sewing process. So, we got 2 sets, one for each side. Just focus on one for the time being. Now, I briefly mentioned I'll be swapping the zip out for a white one, being that the white will stand out pretty bright against the gold there. I'm going to try do it mostly hidden. Now what I plan to do is actually stitch it with the lumpy side of the zip facing that. Now this comes with some risk, because when we sew like that, unless you got a double slide, it's going to sit the tab on the inside. Now this can be beneficial because it's going to get the zip to sit very flat. It's not going to flare out the cut at all. So that's what I'm going for. So when I sew this, I'm going to leave that overhang a few centimeters. So after I cut it, it's much easier to get the slides in place. Alternatively, you can put the slides on first and then stitch with the slides in place, but I prefer to slide them on after, as it can make life a lot easier. I'm going to get that under the machine, set up the tripod, and get to work. So as you can see, the zip sits extremely flat, with a lump facing up. And that's the result I am after. We'll split the center. Okay. So got that there. Grab our zip and our slides. Put one other end so that meet in the center. Now that we can see, even though it's a white zip, it mostly should be hidden. Now we can join it to our other border section and we can continue working. And after we finish joining those together, we're going to be adding piping to the face, or as others may refer to it as welting. So that's just a decorative piping strip sewn around the outside just to give it an added look. So, but the sun is setting, it's getting too dark to film, so I'll come back tomorrow. So now the borders are both complete, and I'm going to stitch piping to the face. So you'll need some strips cut. I cut them 32mm wide. Not too sure what that is in inches, but we'll check. What's that? About 1 1/4. You will also need a cord. So I use a 3mm piping cord. I've seen people use fine ropes and all sorts in there, but I like to use this rubber cord. So it stretches quite nicely, so when you actually need to stretch a seat cover on, that gives you stretch, and allows seats to be manipulated once it's on the foam. So, the basics of what you need, and I will need to swap my foot over, or piping foot, or welting foot, whatever you want to call it. Alright, I'll jump back on the machine and get it set up. Now this is my piping foot here. And as you can see, it's been a little chopped up and modified. Now I like to modify my feet so that I can see the needle and actually get in nice and close to the piping, the edge of the piping, so that I can get a nice tight fitment. So a lot of the time I find once they protrude too far and you fully enclose the needle, it dictates where your needle goes versus allowing you to put the needle where you need it to go. So that's why I do that. I'll grab another foot and show you what the difference looks like. So here are my two sets of feet. You can see this one down the back is much longer. So this was originally designed for a much tighter piping or welting, and that was designed for the size piping that I'm about to use. Wasn't much a fan of that. Even this one I modified a little bit to make better. It does the job, but I still wasn't very happy. But I modified that, and that seems to work much nicer for me. Alright, now when I do my piping, I like to start at the center to the base, in the center at the base of the cover there. I'm going to allow about 1 inch past the center. But I'm going to stop the cord about 1 inch forward of the edge of the stripper pipe of the vinyl. I'm going to start stitching well into the vinyl, leaving this flapping about. So find my 32mm cut, my strips, give me right on at 10mm for my seam allowance. So as I sew, I like to give some backwards tension, not a lot, just a little. So as it goes on flat. So with this modified foot, I can see the exact needle place, every stitch. Alright, now we're back at the start, and we've got this overlap here. So I want to cut this vinyl exactly on center, as close as you can. And this piping, I'm going to cut the end of the start and the finished end at the same time. And that should give you a cut that you can actually bud the cord up against each other. Stitch close to your overlap, and with a small skewer or needle, you can align your cords to the center of the vinyl strip. ensuring that your vinyl strips are nice and tight against each other. You can stitch your overlap. So, now the piping's attached to the face, and we can now attach it to the border. So you want to confirm your marks line up with each other, and you've got the correct orientation. Now I'm trimming these marks just so I can see them on the other side. Everything appears to be lining up nicely, so good to go. Now we want to place our needle on the inside of this existing stitch, and then ensure that we get a nice tight grip on the piping, give it the best possible finish. It will also prevent any of the thread showing through on the finished work. Provided the needle lands on the inside of the existing stitch, you should end up with a neat finish. You just don't want to go too far, otherwise you'll start putting through the piping cord itself. As we get back to where we started, all we need to do is overrun our first maybe 2 inches of stitching, and that'll lock her off nicely. Now I like to run the stitching off the edge of the seam, because by leaving your stitching finished on the stitch line itself, it gives you a risk of having a tail of stitching stick out in being visible from the finished job. So just running the stitch off the edge of the seam will help prevent that. See, that's the piping as it sits there. So I could take it in a little tighter around the base. I think I might actually take it in a little tighter. So all we're going to do, I'll start the stitching back here, and I'll run it from the side all the way back in, and just run it just on the inside of the stitching here. deal. Run the stitching off the edge. And now prevent the thread straying through to finish the work. Ta! So being a relatively thick vinyl, it's never going to be too tight where your overlap is, but being at the bottom of the cover, it shouldn't matter. Now we can switch back over to the normal foot and put the backrest in. So I've got the normal foot back on the machine and I'm about to attach the face panel and the borders to the back panel. So again, like other areas, I'll start in the center at the bottom of the cushion and stitch around. So being the normal foot, all I've got to worry about is stitching 10mm in and lining up my marks. Just like that. Cover is together. Alright, this is the cover as it sits on the bench. Just after assembling. Now this is ready to slip onto the foam. So I'll take that inside, set up the seat inside, and I'll put on the foam. We can have a look at how she looks. So now the backrest is all stitched together and ready to go back on the seat. I'll start working on the base. So using the same techniques as I did before to mark out the panels for the backrest, I'll be using the same techniques for this. Only this side, it doesn't have a cover both sides. So first I need to take all the staples off, separate the cover, unpick it, mark it out just like we did before. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. I'm going to jump to when I have this pulled apart and the cover ready to go back on. So the cover's been assembled, essentially using the same techniques as we went over before. So now all I need to do is wrap this around the board and staple in underneath. So when you roll around the edges, you want to make sure that you set the seam as you go. So as a rule of thumb, you want the seam to be facing down the side of this chair. So if the seam is out of place, it will stand out. So if I fold this back the other way, you can see that this here doesn't sit even. So, alright, so the main thing to be concerned about when using the staple gun is as you pull it around, you want to pull it around even. So you don't want to end up with a spot that's low and then a spot that's high. So you want to keep an eye on your seam as you're going and just ensuring it sits even. I like to start with the centers, so pin the back. Pin the front. There will be areas areas that you need to make relief cuts to make sure it sits evenly. As you get to the corners, you will end up with excess material. So I like to pull the center of the corner, pin it, and with this excess here, I'll grab the center of that and split the difference. You can keep doing that over and over. And now you've got these little bits of extra, you can just flatten them. Here we have it, the cover's stapled in. So we can trim off the excess, and we're going to staple another piece of vinyl just on the inside, just to tidy that all up. Alright, now I have the base cover stapled on the back of the board. We need to hide this mess. So I've just grabbed some spare vinyl out of the shed. I'm going to staple that in place. But first, I'm going to trim off some of this excess. Now when I do these backing materials, I often like to staple to a folding edge. Not entirely necessary, as underneath is rarely seen, but it just gives it that neat finish. Do relief cuts underneath, just so you can follow the shape. What I like to do for the mounting bolts, I like to locate them, set my finger on it, and put a staple either side of the finger so that you can locate these holes later on. now it's the cover's stapled to the back. Just going to cut our holes and then we can fit it to the base, fit it to the frame. And we've got the holes on the side to cut so we can mount our armrests. Now we have this chunk of foam missing that happened when we removed the cover. So I went ahead and cut a little patch that we can just brush on some glue, stick in place, and that will disappear. We have nice, easy and simple patch. Now it's ready for the cover to go back on. Okay, we're getting to the end of the job now. So we're going to be fitting this cover. Now what I like to do when fitting these, I like to fit these inside out. And as I put them on, I like to roll it down onto itself. But as you do it, you just need to make sure you set the seams as you go. So you want to roll it and actually set the seams as you fit the cover. This will prevent a lot of hassle later on trying to reset the seams after it's already fitted. So I like to work side to side, doing your best to keep things even as you go and making adjustments as you need. Now, once you are feeling happy how things are starting to sit, then I can start pulling zips down to close it in. As you get little wrinkles like this, you can actually manipulate the cover, how it sits, by just dragging the cover over. And just the foam pushing into the cover will hold it in place as you let it sit. There we go. The cover is fitted. Now we can attach the base. And we have a restored salon chair in the Holden Roebuck Gold. Alright guys, that's going to be it for the video. Thanks to everyone that's hit that subscribe button. It makes a world of difference once you hit that. And let me know if you like these videos in the comment section below. Let me know what you think, what you guys would like to see. Pretty much all your feedback helps out the channel, lets me know what you want to see, what you don't want to see. Even if it's negative feedback, if you let me know, I can learn from it. So I appreciate you guys watching.